Welcome to the Freedom Fridays podcast. With me, your host, Pete Clark, the Whispers guy. Work seems to expand to the time that we give it. And I've been investing my time, occasionally on a Friday, to explore how we use our time, our energy, our attention, and the impact it has on our identity. I've been exploring over season 1 some of the mindset shifts in the handcuffs of I have to the freedom of I choose to. And I've shared some conversations, some tips, some tools about how you might want to invest your own time, your own energy, your own attention. How you might want to, if you choose to, make some changes to your identity. How you might have freedom from I have to and design a life around I choose to. If that's of interest to you, then this is the podcast for you. In season 2, I'm going to be exploring some experts and asking them what freedom means for them, and trying to help people work to live and not live to work. Trying to help people add life to their years and not just years to their life. So let's dive on in, and here's season 2. Welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Freedom Fridays podcast, where I have my guest today is Alison Cameron. Now, Alison, actually, we're colleagues for a while, way back. One of the first colleagues I had coming to Australia, and Alison has gone on a very different journey since then. She is a published author. She is published in many forms, I believe, which I'm looking forward to finding out. So it was a bit of a coup for me to catch Alison at this point in her journey to ask all things about freedom. So Alison, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Pete, and so lovely to reconnect with you.
I know I've found my fault and your fault, everyone's fault. The pandemic has forced media and given us an opportunity to reconnect with people in a way that we'd never have imagined before.
Yeah. There's lots of magic that can come through these disruptions, right?
Yeah. So, Alison, I start the podcast with the same question, and it's really in the work that you do and the people that you work with. What does freedom mean?
It's such an interesting question, Pete. It could be answered at so many levels, and I think it's very divergent. So if I was to ask that question of my client base, the response that they give would be more based on really where they are in their evolutionary journey. And so I think it would range from everything from freedom to be myself more, freedom to have more sense of authority and autonomy in the decisions I can make as a leader. And that could range from everything. I have CEOs that I've worked with, for example, that feel stifled by the board. So I think often we think once you get to a certain role of leadership, then there's so much freedom and autonomy, and yet it doesn't really exist when we take our authority from a role. It does start to exist when we take our sense of authority more internally and from a sense of our own internal compass. And so I think the commonality that would sit across all of the people that I work with, and I work with many leaders all around the world from different cultures, different kinds of organizations and different contexts, would be the sense of I'd like to be able to be more myself. Whether that is this sense of being able to apply the values that they hold dear within their context more readily, and with less pushback or less resistance from the various systems. Whether it be choosing my own work hours, and so I'm not such a slave to the round-the-clock meetings and the demands, the freedom to have more time for my family or more time for my creativity. And yet what sits underneath that, Pete, I believe there are two constructs. The first is the construct of our ego. And so what sits within that is I'd like to be free from limiting scripts, limiting stories of self that I have created to some degree or co-created with my external reality through my life, from my own limiting beliefs. And then there's an important aspect that I think those of us who are very privileged often don't consider enough. And that is freedom from the scripts of our society, freedom from the limiting beliefs of capitalism, for example, or economic structures and systems, political structures and systems, social structures and systems. And those systems that we exist in inform our internal dialogue or our internal story of self, and vice versa. And so they're not two separate parts, they're actually part of a much larger system. And yet my sense is, similarly to the movie The Matrix, where we want to get unplugged, most of us at a deep level, whether we recognize it or not, would like to be unplugged. And so the people I work with might vocalize that desire for freedom and liberation in a multitude of ways. And yet that desire to be able to be more fully myself, more fully my true nature, comes from, from deep within, from a place that is often scary for people to even sit with.
Yes. Wow. I'm going to start with the immediate thing that strikes me, and that's almost the first thing you said, being myself more. You and I have explored that question for a long time, and probably in different ways. And when we talk about that, certainly when I talk about or raise that sort of idea or concept with clients, there's often a recognition, yes, I want to be myself more. But I often wonder if they know what they mean by that.
Yeah.
So there's a calling, there's a something, there's an itch, there's a scratch, there's something they kind of go, yeah, but I don't know what it is. So could you just give us a take on when we talk about, be yourself, be myself more, what does that mean? What's missing? What are we not being that's myself that is kind of hiding in the background?
First, I'd like to tackle the first part of what you just said, Pete, which is they don't know what that means. And I really resonate with that. In our world, we have taken away the value of asking the question, who am I? And part of eroding that value has been the need to come up with some kind of a constructed, mental, rational answer to that question. But that question opens up a journey, actually, right? And it's not a journey with a final destination necessarily.
Well, the coffin. Maybe.
Well, maybe
depending
not.
on your belief system.
maybe not, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the beginning of a whole other inquiry. However, for a lot of people, the beginning of discovering what is that I would like to be more of, it begins with asking that question, but to ask it without needing an answer, and to delve into that opportunity to explore. And you asked then later in what you were sharing about what is it that's lacking. And I would say we are disconnected as humanity. So that disconnection through our technological advancement has likely become stronger. We are relating more with screens or through screens, many of us, than with other human beings. And there's always something slightly artificial in those relationships. You can get them very close to deep authenticity. And of course, sometimes I actually have to ask myself, have I met that person face to face yet? Because we've created such a deep connection through technology. So I'm not saying deep connection isn't possible, but there's roadblocks to get through to make that happen, right? Now, that's just one symbol of disconnection that was happening even before we had smartphones at our fingertips 24/7. And that is that we have disconnected with our wildness as human beings.
Okay.
We've disconnected from a non-constructed creative force with that sense of true nature, the things that naturally come out of us. Like, I can't recall the speaker, but there was a beautiful TED talk on education. And one of the quotes in that, and creativity, one of the quotes was, we'll have to find it and put it in the link underneath this podcast.
Sir Ken, someone?
Yes, exactly. That we are not, we don't find our creativity, we lose it.
You lose it. Ironically, through education.
Through education, right? So if you look at a lot of our systems, they've been constructed from a certain worldview. Our education system, our justice system, our economic systems, our political systems. And that worldview that we currently breathe in through all of these systems and institutions, including our education system, they're not liberating. They're not necessarily supportive of freedom in the human being, of a human being getting to know themselves at a deep level, at asking those questions, who am I? Because I tell you what, asking that question, who am I? We really go down that rabbit hole. That is a political statement, and it is dangerous to status quo forces. It is dangerous to the power brokers that are currently reaping egoistic or materialistic benefits from holding these systems in place. Because as soon as we actually go down that rabbit hole, as soon as we start to unplug from that matrix, that's going to disrupt all of those systems that are already getting disrupted, right? But it's going to raise them to the ground so something new can rebirth.
I remember years ago reading a book, I think it was Jack Cornfield. The title was First the Ecstasy, Then the Laundry.
Okay.
Now, I can't remember the actual essence of it. My take on the title was, yes, you can seek and ask these beautiful questions around who am I, what's my contribution, what's my purpose, at what evolutionary stage. And yet for some, I'd probably argue most of us, are in relationship with people, jobs, pets, families, societies, communities. And for me, the laundry part was, and yet I still got to pay the electricity bill, and yet I've still got to eat, and yet I've still got to fix the roof because it's raining. All that kind of pragmatic, necessary to some degree stuff. And yet here's me on the other side going, yeah, and Pete, I am. It's a real, I struggle sometimes with that balance. Yeah. And I would argue, Eve, I don't even know if I've ever got it in balance. Yeah.
Maybe it's because we think we need to, or we see them as two contradictory forces, right? When I hear first the ecstasy and the laundry, well, the laundry needs to get done regardless, but I can either feel constrained by that action, or my interior state of liberation can be non-affected by that activity. So I don't see it as a polarity that we have to balance. I see the laundry as an activity that can be infused with soul.
Okay, interesting.
Infused with ecstasy. And by infusing that activity with the ecstasy of my inner liberation, then the opportunity for, I don't know, even better laundry outcomes become available, right? I might innovate my laundry routine through that ecstatic dance I do with it.
So I welcome your observations then. Based on my comment, would that suggest that in that moment, in this kind of conversation, at that time, I was seeing, just the metaphor of the ecstasy and the laundry as a polarity, as opposed to something that's interdependent?
Well, from what you were saying you haven't found the balance. And I find whenever we come up with this idea of needing to balance something, often it's informed by an either or thinking. I don't know, you tell me. Is that how you are approaching it?
I don't know. What I was approaching it with, my comment around I rarely find the balance, is I rarely find that wherever the ends of any polarity, or if there's a 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional one, it's rarely still. It's always oscillating one way or the other. So the circumstance, I'm led a little bit by circumstance. If this requires attention, then that requires attention, which is making me think of, again, that simple but profound and never ending seeking of the answer, even if there is an answer. Like you said, there probably isn't. Be yourself more. If I start with, well, who are you, Pete? I go, well, I'm me.
Yeah.
Or, well, I'm Pete. And well, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a colleague, I'm a friend, I don't know, a dozen or so different roles that I play.
Yeah.
Is there something, again, not directionally, but is there something above or beneath that brings that all together?
My experience is yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So as soon as we identify with name or role, to me, that's a very limiting construct. When we were born at our first breath, there was an essence in the same way, if we would like to use the archetype of a tree, the essence of the whole tree is in the seed.
Yeah.
When we were born, we didn't have a role. Some of us didn't have a name. Some of us already had a name that was chosen. But for many of us, we didn't. And yet there was still a natural self. There was still an essence there of perhaps, unmanifested in our, I guess, material existence as yet.
Yeah.
But an essence there to be expressed. And in the same way as Sir Kenneth that you said, said that we don't learn creativity, we unlearn it. I think we unlearn who we are. We unlearn that sense of essence. And we have to. So that process isn't wrong. And in every society at every time, there's been an experience of enculturalization, right? Where we learn social norms. We learn how to, fit in a certain construct, how to do the laundry in the time that we're born into. And, if we continue on that metaphor, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a particular stage and a particular phase of life. And I think for a lot of us, we get stuck there. So once we learn how to do the laundry well, we learn how somewhat, and some people never learn, and that's okay too, but we learn how to somewhat navigate our existence. We kind of stop there, and we stop with role and name, and we seek to, I guess, do the very best we can within that construct. And yet there's a whole other world we can open into. And for me, that's in my book, I call that beyond level A leadership, if we're looking at it from a leadership perspective. And that is stepping into the realm of soul. And to a large degree, while we can still use the skills that we had to use to become, respectful, effective members of a society, we no longer are constrained by those tools and skills. Yeah. So we can use them, and yet our consciousness is beyond them. And in fact, it opens up a whole other journey. And my argument would be that what is keeping us in a very challenging time as humanity is that we have become very happy with staying in the status quo of this very rational, very dry, very commercial, very, I guess, people would call it a masculine sort of patriarchal type of mindset, without moving into the mystery. Yeah, so we've kind of rationalized ourselves out of the mystery. And for me, where we move beyond the idea of I'm now doing the laundry, I'm now in ecstasy, and it's either more of one and more of the other, and into an integration of those forces, is where we start to see things in a very circular way, which is far more feminine, if we look at the traditional feminine, right? So in that circle, there might be some more laundry and some more ecstasy, but they're not counterbalancing each other. They're just part of a circular experience. And that ecstasy or consciousness travels with us right through the circle.
What struck me in what you said is, there's a couple of things. Let me ask the first one. Are we happy in the status quo? Or is the mystery so uncertain, I'm not willing to risk it?
What's your experience of that, Pete?
For me, it's more the latter. And I'll tie that to a personal thing without revealing any confidence or anyone listening. Tied to this there'll be many times sounds like it's all day, every day. It's not. But in personal situations, and particularly in client interactions, if I'm really me and really say what I'm thinking and feeling, I probably wouldn't get many engagements. And personally, because, you know, part of the exploration I've gone through of myself is I'd love to get deep with Alison quickly, right? Let's do the cliche. How are you? How is the weather? Yeah. Now let's get into fears, hopes, dreams, and concerns as quick as we can, because that's what I want to talk about. So personally, sometimes I can, and I do it deliberately. I can be really inappropriate because I'm trying to provoke people out of the comfort. I'm trying to provoke them out of the state. I don't necessarily agree with the provocation, but I'm doing it just to stir the pot. And of course, that bumps up against ego, uncertainty, and all of the things that means that's now upsetting. That's now, you know, not that I'm necessarily offending or offensive, but that can be taken that way because it's stirring them into look in the mirror to these questions like, who are you? And like we say, sometimes that's not my, it's not my role, or I don't have permission to even ask the question in that moment and that time.
So much in what you've just said, Pete. The first piece I'd love to share a perspective on is the idea that if I was fully myself and said exactly what I was on my mind, I wouldn't get the gig. You know, and I guess underneath that, I wonder if it's, you know, I'd break the relationship in some way. I don't know if that resonates for you.
Yeah,
you know, the relationship would not be
at a pragmatic level,
salvageable at that pragmatic level.
Yeah.
And I guess my approach to that is more of an interior approach. So my experience of being myself fully in every interaction is not determined on, am I speaking what's in my mind? It's, am I fully in my heart? Yeah. Operating from my essence. Yeah. My sense of truth. And also cognizant of what the appropriate intervention is in this moment in time to support that person, that system, that team, that situation to its next stage of evolution. Now, if that's a provocation, I'm very blessed in life, not because I've had money, but because I have not had a driver around money. And while I haven't had vast amounts of intergenerational wealth supporting me in my life, I have had the privilege of being white, being an Australian, and being born in Australia. Regardless, you're already in the 1% most wealthy people in the world, even if you're living on government benefits. Let's put that in perspective. And also coming from an upbringing where I didn't have to worry about food being put on the table, right? So I have to acknowledge all of that privilege and opportunity that has enabled me to also feel a sense of I can take risk in this space. And I've always taken risk in regards to money, because for me, I'd rather than sell my soul, even a fragment of it, for $1. And that's always been, you know, the deep sense that I've had, which is also, you know, I think a real privilege, because that enables me to take risk. So if inside of myself, I perceive that the intervention required to support that group towards the next stage in their evolution is a provocation, then it will be a provocation. However, if my sense is actually what this group needs now is just a safe space to explore what is currently on their mind, and that's the foundation that's required, and maybe provocation happens in 6 months, then I'm not going to vomit what I perceive onto that group for the sake of the relief that gives me. And so I think that's the the approach that feels resonant for me. And I think this comes back to that question of authenticity, because this word authenticity, authentic leadership has been, popularized. And as soon as something becomes popularized and commodified, it often takes it down to its most basic, primitive, not primitive in a naturalistic sense, but non-complex.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally
Non-systemic resonance. And I think for a lot of people, they just go, I'm just going to vomit my thoughts and feelings on you, and that's authentic. And that's authentic leadership, right?
Yes, 100%.
And I would argue that there needs to be a little bit more nuance in that, because that might be authentic, but it's not leadership. Because leadership is being able to, from my perspective, it's being able to come from our naturalness, from leadership qualities like compassion, patience, bringing perspective, right? And being able to see a system or a person or a team's potential and know what nourishment to give it at any given stage in time. And sometimes you might need to cut down the tree, but most of the time it just needs some water or some fertilizer, or maybe some of the surrounding weeds need to be removed. So yeah, I think that like psychological safety, which I have a real problem with where that's gone in the vernacular, authentic leadership, just so many of these terms have been misinterpreted and dumbed down, so that when we use them, we really don't know what we're talking about.
And I, to use the analogy, I would probably, I'd position myself as only on the next page. And I see it so often with things like authentic leadership, psychological safety, growth mindset. It's been so popularized and dumbed down that actually the words that are being used is completely counter to what some of the original definitions have been.
That's right.
And it's fascinating and frustrating.
It is fascinating and frustrating. So Pete, I mean, you started by saying, that perhaps it will break the relationship. My experience of when I really tune into not just what's in my own consciousness, but what's appropriate for the other party, is I haven't lost too many relationships through that journey. And the ones that I have lost have probably been a beneficial loss for me, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, I was exaggerating a little bit. I think the key word for me is
nuance. No, I hear that. Yeah.
Is nuance. It's knowing when and where and how and with who, and coming from a place of, compassion, love, connection, community. If that's the intention, I might ask or tell.
Yeah, exactly.
I might be silent or say something. And I don't know necessarily we ever get that absolutely right. But my sense is if we come from that place, usually that's what's picked up. Yeah. Whether we get the question right.
That's right.
Maybe not. But it's more, there's a deeper sense of connection between two or more humans that picks up that energetic intention.
Yeah. I'm not provoking you out of my sense of ego, or what's good for me. I'm provoking out of a sense of care for you, and that's what I'm hearing you say. And absolutely, I would have a strong resonance with that.
And again, so any of my clients that are listening would go, "You don't do that, Pete." I go, "Yep, you're right." There is some ego in there sometimes, inevitably. And I'd be interested in you sharing your thoughts on that, because the word ego is an interesting word. And again, I'm sure it's used in many circumstances where it's not really fully understood. And when you say, even in a group setting, to even build some sense of safety in conversation, and you mention, our egos are here to protect us. You can almost see people, bristling and going, "I don't have an ego. I'm not egotistical." And it's like, well, we all are. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So do you have a do you have a view on how someone might navigate that?
Navigate what?
The sense of ego that we have one, and it's
Oh.
there for a reason, and
Yeah.
it's sometimes a helpful reason.
Yeah. The challenge with ego is when the ego is unhealthy, right? So that unhealthy ego can manifest very narcissistically. And by the way, this narcissism is fed by our consumeristic, materialistic driven society, right? So please, no one feel like it's your fault that we can blame these external systems, but it is our responsibility once we have an ego and a construct and a story of self, then when as adults to know what to do, and as at its extreme through arrogance, as you just shared, this sense of egotism, or through massive self-doubt. It's the same force at different sides of a polarity here. So for people who say, oh, I really don't believe in myself and I don't feel I have anything to offer, I'm not confident, that is ego. That is the same self-protective ego manifesting at one side of the polarity as someone who says, I'm uber confident, I always get things right. Both are signs of unhealthy egos. If we think about ego as the personality construct that's been created, one level of it is self-protective, of course.
Sure.
Now, if we think of the ego as like a horse, and I haven't done a lot of horse riding, but my daughter, when she was young, she was really into horse riding. And so I did a couple of treks with her and we, I've been exposed to that a little bit. And when you're riding a horse, you have to let it know where to go and what to do. We think of the ego as a horse, right? Is the ego riding us? Or are we riding the ego? We also need to form a relationship and connection with that horse. We need to have respect and love for it. We need to feed it. We need to brush it. We need to wash it, all of those things. So it's not about making the ego wrong, but it's about being able to observe it. And if we can observe that ego, then we know we're bigger than that construct. The very fact that we can observe a self-protective thought. I can observe I'm uber confident. And look, some people are completely wedded to their ego and can't observe it. So the first skill we teach is observation. Observation of your thoughts and feelings. Questioning, is that the only thought or feeling that might be possible in this situation, right? But for most people, it's quite easy to develop an opportunity to observe that ego at play. How can we then help that ego to be healthy? By healthy, it doesn't mean uber confident and in a narcissistic, psychopathic tendency kind of mode. But it also doesn't mean that I am a doormat, right? I'm able to have discernment in my world. And then I start that who am I question needs to go beyond the ego. And when the who am I question goes beyond the ego, then we start to find a different source of power. And then lovingly, we can start to, in the same way that we might mold some clay into a beautiful pot, we can look at that ego and maybe it's a bit of a mess right now, but we can create something of beauty out of it.
Okay, I'm going to take you back a little bit because I'm going to be a little bit indulgent here. And I hadn't connected the, I guess, the popularized version of ego to some of the other sides. Now, I would confess that I've probably been in many situations, arrogant and, blah, 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 the kind of unhealthy. My ego probably has shown up there on many occasions. I hadn't connected it to the other side, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And yet that's prevalent right now in me, in many situations. And I hadn't connected it to ego at all.
And so if you ask the question, you don't need to do it now, but this is for listeners as well. What is that arrogance protecting me from?
on the arrogance side or the fear side?
On the arrogance side, when I have the need to be overconfident or arrogant, and you mentioned earlier that the ego can be self-protective, Pete, what is that arrogance protecting?
Well, no, again, where I'm going is more historically, I would have been arrogant.
Yeah.
And some might say, yeah, you are now anyway, but I'm more interested for me doing a little bit of exploration on the fear side.
Okay, so I was asking a leading question, so apologies for that, but let me make it really explicit for the listeners.
Yeah.
So mostly people that have gone to the arrogance side have gone there because they're protecting themselves from uncertainty and fear. So the fact that you're now experiencing more of that uncertainty and fear, Pete, is that you're leaning in. It's a beautiful, from my perspective, evolutionary step.
It doesn't feel beautiful.
I understand that because you've deconstructed some of that self-protective mechanism that probably wasn't serving you or the people around you to some degree. And now the opportunity is to be with, from my experience, that fear and uncertainty, and inquire into it and experience, what riches that can bring.
Yeah.
And then find a different sense of confidence. And I'm not just talking about you now, Pete. I'm really thinking about the broader listeners. And in my book, Leadership for the New Millennium, there's a chapter on humility, right? And we talk a lot in that chapter about false confidence, which often looks like arrogance. False humility, which often looks like self-doubt. Manifests as self-doubt, but true humility comes from self-knowledge and a very accurate understanding of self to the degree we can have it. And true humility actually has a high degree of confidence in it. Yeah, that confidence of knowing who I am to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting and confusing and perplexing, and that's caused some thought. Well, unarticulated and unresolved thought.
Good.
At this point.
Good. And this is, as you know, Pete, and you would have said to many of your clients, when we get to that point of confusion, we're at the point of breakthrough because our normal neural pathways have been disrupted. We've heard something that has unsettled, even the cells in our bodies, in a sense, become unsettled. But in that experience, space gets created for something new. And I think, coming back to what do we need to be free from? I think one of the things that we need to be free from as human beings to reconnect with our true nature is answers. We're so obsessed, aren't we, in our Western kind of model of thinking with quickly find the answer, quickly find the solution. In the space between that confusion and the solution, if we can stretch that out and be there for longer, a lot more insight can come, and then our solution won't just be to this one piece. We'll find a solution that uplifts the wholes that we're part of, right? Whether that whole is our whole self, our whole consciousness, or our whole family, or our whole community, or our whole team, or our whole workplace. We all have these wholes, or these larger wholes that we're a part of.
Yeah.
And we spend so much time remediating or finding answers to these bits that we lose sight of the evolutionary waves that we could surf.
Yeah. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I came across the Conscious Leadership Group. I don't know if you're familiar with them. And this principle of moving from the world is done by me to the world is happening through me.
Yeah.
So that was a pivot moment. Now, I probably stayed in the same place, but looked in a different direction. And so for, 4 or 5 years already, I've been pondering, wondering, exploring, experimenting, expressing a little bit more living, world happening through me as opposed to by me. And it's bloody hard.
Yeah.
It is bloody hard when you're
Yeah.
trying to live a pragmatic existence in society as a husband, a father, a caregiver, an income provider, a friend, a colleague, a mate, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
to let the world happen through you.
Yeah.
Because when what's happening through you is not supporting the pragmatic side of you, geez, it's so easy to go, what a lot of bollocks this is.
Yeah. How do you know what's coming through you isn't supporting?
I don't.
Yeah.
And so I reckon if I compare as best as I can, myself today compared to myself 4 or 5 years ago, my response to anything, any suggestions of coming through would have been to double down on buy me. Work harder, sort it all out, push yourself, don't be an idiot, get over it.
Yeah.
It'd have been, I guess, the other side of ego representation, because I can fix it, because most of my identity, or certainly a strong part of my identity and journey to date, has happened by me. So I'm not we all are, but not often in world happens to me.
Yeah.
It's very much, right, I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And, evolutionary for me, I came across this next stage. And as I wouldn't even say I'm leaning into it, I'm looking into it, as opposed to leaning in.
Yeah.
When you're in that moment and those times when things aren't necessarily going your way, or the expectations that you might have for A, B, C. And I can think of I won't mention them, but 3 specific things, personally and professionally, that I'm going, oh my God, it's falling apart. Right, I need to get some things done. I need to make this happen. And that is such a tough conversation with myself, because there's part of me going, no, this is all part of it. You mentioned in one of your book, ego tests.
Yeah.
I'm sensing this is an ego test for me.
Yeah.
And it's bloody hard to pass the test.
Yeah. And sometimes, it takes a few times of failing and realizing on the other side that winning for the ego didn't actually get it what it wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. To then be able to overcome that. I'd like to come back to this concept of either or. It's either by me or through me.
Well, so no, my interpretation was,
Yeah.
there's going to be parts that are the world's happening to me, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to let go entirely of all of the things that have made me, in my definition, successful, because that's happened by me.
Yeah.
However, it's become overwhelming and too much pressure and yada yada. Hence, I've been exploring happening through me. Now, again, I don't want to put it into a binary. Well, let's make it 80-20 then. Or I don't mean that, but I mean exploring ways, situations, circumstances where I'm able to sit with the discomfort. I'm able to sit with the fear. I'm able to sit with the vulnerability and the shame.
Yeah.
Without trying to fix it.
Yeah.
In the ways that I'd normally have fixed it 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Which were perfectly, it would seem, relevant for then.
Yeah.
But not so maybe necessarily relevant for now, because I'm different.
Yeah. So from what I just heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're experiencing this through me as things that kind of happen in my world, whether it be an internal movement or an external movement of things falling away or being disrupted. And rather than going straight into fixing it, I'm allowing myself to sit with the discomfort.
Yes. Again, that's what's hard. Yes, I am. And boy, that's hard.
Might I paint a picture of what might be on the other side of that?
Yes, please.
And in the same way as we discussed polarity earlier as, the ecstasy and the laundry, and then if we come into seeing a circle, right? As we become okay with not fixing, as the fixer ego can start to deconstruct, and I think this is a beautiful stepping stone, what you're doing right now, Pete, this sitting with this, being with this uncertainty. What can emerge on the other side is this sense that what comes through me is also by me. so that separation can start to connect. And so in that sense, what comes through me isn't just the stuff that gets disrupted on the outside or the inside. It might be an insight. It might be a solution, but that solution is coming from a different level of consciousness. It's not coming from the ego, let's fix it. It's coming from the let me sit silently and ask the question, connect with my inner voice. Yeah, some people might call that the intuition or the higher self, or those different levels of consciousness that we can have access to, or our authentic self, not the authentic ego self. There's another authentic self.
Right.
Let me place the thing I'm struggling with in front of that extraordinary universal source, whatever that might be, and just ask the question. And perhaps an insight will come, and you will then, as a human being and as a healthy ego, pick up that insight and do something with it, put it into action. And this is where I've seen, you know, and you might already be doing this, Pete, to some degree, I imagine you are, is that as we start to apply our activity, the by me, from a different level of consciousness, that separation of through and by is healed. And I say healed because it feels like a healing, because uncertainty and vulnerability is no longer associated so much with the shame. And it's a cracking open into something creative.
Yeah, I hadn't connected the insight from through me to then I can take something and make it happen.
There's I think, you know, the way, again, we're educated, and particularly in the West, we are taught to compartmentalize a lot. Yeah, this is the way our brain, and there are some wonderful, I mean, gosh, a couple of months ago, I sorted my spice cupboard, and then I got a label maker and started labeling all the spices. And every day I open that cupboard and I have such a sense of joy with that compartmentalization and the labeling of the spices. It's just a thing of beauty. So I love a good compartmentalization. But when we bring it so much into our sense of self, I think we miss out on the holism. And I've been really lucky in my life to be exposed to, you know, the wisdom of Indigenous people in Australia and all around the world, and to work with different cultures. And I think quite naturally, I had more of a holistic sense of seeing the world. I was probably a bit neurodivergent from a young child. So I've always been a marginal thinker. I've always seen things a bit differently. And I've always felt more of a resonance with a different kind of more Indigenous, more Eastern worldview. So this stuff has been more easy for me, right? And in the same way as some people are gifted artists or gifted speakers, I don't see, it's just something that was in me. It was something that I didn't have to work very hard for, right? That's a great blessing. But that sense of seeing things from a whole and seeing the interrelationship of things, to me, allows me to move from tangible to intangible worlds as an effortless flow. The laundry and the ecstasy are all part of the same life. The uncertainty and the confidence merge and work together in beautiful ways. And in fact, I think in my book, I talk a little bit about, you know, this idea of yin and yang. Well, they're both part of a circle. Right. I think so often we're either identified with the yang, with that might be more the by me traditionally, or the yin, which is through me, with failing to see those little eyes in both sides of the yin yang. They each exist in each other. And more than that, they're part of a circle. They're part of a whole. And in the same way as when I danced tango, you know, years ago, and it was just so lovely. And, you know, as a female, I was just able to let the male lead me in that dance, but I also needed to hold my center and my core and, you know, and be part of that. We need to participate with that dance and see it as a dance. Yeah. And in that dance, the two opposing forces create something of beauty. Once we see that, once we're able to get them to work together. But that's hard. That's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience, since I've been exposed to that information and some of those experiences, particularly when it, circumstances or events or things happen that you kind of go, oh, hang on, I didn't really deserve that, but it's happened.
Yeah.
Oh, how have I contributed to that? And, that constant peering in the mirror can be exhausting.
And I think in the West, it's become pathologized.
Okay.
So the self-examination has become part of this whole narcissistic construct. And I remember a phase of my life when I was really into personal growth and development, when I was very young, and I was like, no, this is actually, it's taking me out of the sense of holism, right? I'm getting so self-obsessed with, all of these bits. Yeah, great. Okay, something's happened. What's my part of the mess?
Yep.
Let's take, even if it's 1%, let's take responsibility for it. But sometimes stuff just happens. And sometimes other people are assholes.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And our responsibility was, I didn't actually pay attention to the fact that that person was an asshole, and I'm going to do more of that in the future.
Yeah.
Right. So I think sometimes, and this is where I love working with whole systems, with larger systems, with communities, with the world, and rather than, just on myself, because I don't see a separation between the two, number one. Number two, there's a big wide world out there that I can get interested in. And I love what you said, when something happens, it causes me to self-reflect. My experience of a lot of Westerners who get hooked into personal growth is it can become unhealthy at a point.
Yeah, I sense that.
Too inward looking, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so again, the word comes to me, nuance.
Yeah.
About when to, when not to. I can't remember the part of your book, so maybe you can remember, but as I was reading some of it, what struck me was quite a few years ago, my wife was diagnosed or potentially diagnosed with some serious disease. And so we've only just started exploring this. And we said, okay, so if this is the case, and we actually named some people at the time who we would go, we don't really want them around.
Yeah.
Or we're going to move from that energy.
Yeah.
Which was even an interesting conversation for us to have. It subsequently turned out she didn't have the disease, and yet we didn't put into place the removing ourselves from the energy part, which we've reflected on a number of times over the years and kind of gone, why didn't we do that? And I guess that's partly our sense of ego protecting us and trying to fit in, and I think it was the bit about, you mentioned about fitting in. And if I put that into a work context or even a personal context, it's probably easier for you and I to connect than it would be for you and I plus one other, I'm guessing. And then you and I plus two more, and then six of us. Have you found that gets even harder the more people there are, or actually is it easier?
Such an interesting question. I haven't really thought about it. So, that'll be something I ruminate on. Honestly, I only really pay attention to fitting in with myself these days. Not in a narcissistic way, but in the sense of, if I'm here being myself to the best of my ability with compassion and love for the people around me, then that's really, I don't really think about the ingredients, and I feel quite at home in a variety of spaces. And so when you say, is it easier for us to connect, you and me, or would it be more difficult with a third person? I mean, there's another perspective in the room. There's another energy. There's another whole person to consider. However, it hasn't really been my experience, actually. I mean, there is a difference between one-on-one conversation, and I love one-on-one conversation. I wouldn't say it's more difficult or harder. It's just, it's something different, I think, when there's other people in the space. However, what you said about your wife's, and I'm so glad that she's well and healthy, that's wonderful news. I think so often as human beings, we wait until it's complete crisis to make the choices we know in our hearts are healthy.
Yep.
And we see this on a macro scale if we look at the way we've treated our beautiful home planet.
Yes.
Rather than looking holistically at the fact that if we're going to transform the pollution that we're creating on the planet, we need to start with the pollution of our consciousness. We need to start with our worldviews, with our relationships. Like, how on earth would you pollute the planet if you feel like you're in a deep, loving relationship with it? You would not. There's something very flawed about our worldview, our thinking, that's led to the current cataclysmic we're facing as a humanity. But we need to start at that level. And that's that beautiful quote by Einstein: we can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that's created. Yep. We have to go broader, higher, more holistic.
Yep.
And Pete, you know, that example you shared, I think is just priceless, in that I'm sure everyone listening, and I'm sure myself included, we've got those examples where right now we know what we should be doing, and yet we're risking ill health or non-emancipatory situations, coming back to Freedom Fridays, non-freeing situations, and we're playing that off against what? Staying a bit safer and more comfortable for a few moments, while we're the frog in the water boiling and getting cooked.
I'm going to pick up on a concept because I like the idea of this, and I'm interested. Two questions. Fitting in with yourself as a concept, which I love. I'd love to explore that a little bit. But I'm going to start, because I know in your book you've talked about rituals and practices. Question one, binary question. Is there a difference? What's the difference between a ritual and a practice, if there is one? And then secondary question, what would be some practical rituals and practices one could do that would help one fit in with oneself?
Lovely. Thank you. What beautiful questions. Practice and ritual, from a language perspective, I think we could get overly intellectual about it, so let's not go there.
Yep.
The word ritual for me is something I like to use because it contains a sense of sacredness.
Okay.
So in the book, I describe actually the difference between a ritual and not a practice, but a habit. When something becomes a habit, for many of us, it becomes unconscious. So most of us don't consciously brush our teeth unless we've just been to the dentist and they've told us
going to the dentist,
floss, or there'll be problems. And then for most of us, for a few weeks to a month, we'll be a bit more conscious about it. But for most of us, a habit, becomes something quite unconscious. For a practice or a ritual to maintain power and to be liberating, induce freedom, emancipation, it should be something that carries sacredness with it each time we do it. So a level of consciousness with it. So it's just as thrilling to brush my teeth tomorrow as it was today, because I'm bringing that presence to it. So, I certainly am an advocate of meditation. I have been meditating consciously since I was around 13 years of age. And that was a long time ago now. This is grey hair for people who are seeing that. And I have meditated every single day, done a meditation practice now for 24 years, I believe. Wow. No matter what's been happening in my life. And at a certain point, I tipped that into, I still sit for meditation, certainly every day, even if it's for a minute. But, it tips into meditative living. And I think for too many people, they have a meditation habit who meditate, where they sit and do whatever they do, whatever practice they do. And it's not become a ritual. They don't come to it fresh with curiosity, with vulnerability each time. And so it stays on the meditation cushion, or it stays in that section. But there's no good doing that kind of meditation unless it starts to really spill into meditative living. And what is that? It's being fully present and alive and fitting in with oneself and connected to our broader whole in any given moment, including when we're doing the laundry, which means that we are experiencing the ecstasy as we're doing the laundry, to come back to the beginning of the conversation. And so, I would say, yes, I sit and meditate every day. Yes, even if it's just for a minute. And yet I don't see, again, a polarity between sitting and meditating and everything else I do in my day. Yeah. Which is from that same spontaneously arising space of presence. So I am an advocate for meditation, but not if it's a commodified mindfulness practice to try to help you to push down your feelings and dissatisfaction with our capitalistic, materialistic society and stop you from opening up the question, who am I? Meditation should be an inquiry into how can we be more natural and more flourishing as human beings.
Sorry to interrupt. You've made a fantastic distinction for me, particularly in the field of meditation, because I've known about meditation for years and I've practiced it on and off for years. And actually, probably a year before the pandemic hit, I began practicing it more often, and I've now developed a habit. I've just clicked over 401st day today. Of daily meditation, ranging from 2 minutes to 20, whatever it might be. But the distinction you've made for me is it's become a habit, but not a ritual. So I now do it every day, but I don't bring the presentness, I don't bring the sacredness to it often enough. And again, if I take that beyond that, it certainly doesn't necessarily translate into meditative living. So I've done the first thing. I've made it into a habit.
Wonderful.
Which is great. I think it's really good.
It's great.
And
now
so
you can enliven it.
The next thing for me would be the sacredness too. Because again, full confession, that sometimes I would be meditating, which sounds ridiculous, as I'm firing up the laptop. Which is such an incongruence.
Well, not if it's spilled into meditative living, because then you're meditating as you're firing up your laptop. So if you come to me and say, Alison, I haven't had a whirring thought for 3 years and I'm in full meditative living and I meditate as I fire my laptop up, then I'll believe you. But I get what you're saying. As we develop, because we're also changing the way our brain works. And this is the wonderful thing about having more scientific understanding in the Western construct of the way our brain works, because what ancient sages have been telling us for millennia is now being proven by science. And so, to sit and meditate, each time we do that, we're rewiring our brain, we're changing our neurophysiology. And so that's super important. And also to create that space. The ritual, I always love a good morning and evening ritual. And a lovely evening ritual is just to review the day. And you might be working on something in particular. So, whether it is to fit in with myself more. We can get to that in a minute. And when today did I really get that sense that I was fitting in with myself, and what that means is this sense of, I was in my heart, I was feeling a sense of center, I was being truthful with myself and hopefully with others. Sometimes with filters, because we don't want to provoke people when it's not the right time for them. When was that time that I really had that sense, and when didn't I? So when did I feel out of touch with myself, or like I was trying to fit in more with others than myself, or more with a system than myself, and just to observe that without judgment. So we can just do that day review, forgive ourselves for when we weren't quite where we wanted to be. No judgment, just that was interesting, take the information, that's really interesting, that was fascinating, right? And have a moment of really recognizing without judgment again, those were the moments when I felt really strong in myself, felt really centered, felt very much in my heart. What can I learn from that? And then just put the day down, write down anything else remaining, is I think we don't get good sleep, a lot of us, because we're carrying our day stress and our day learnings into our night. So our night, we're just processing all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then we wake up tired. And then a beautiful morning ritual, even if you've got 1 minute, 2 minutes. And look, people listening, I've run businesses, I've had children, I've been through all the hideous traumas of life, right? Just so you know. I get how it's hard sometimes to find even a moment of your day and all of that stuff. So I get that. And to get to freedom, we need discipline. To get to freedom, we need discipline. And though, even if it's just 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes in the morning, just to find a way to center yourself, to write down, and writing things down is much more powerful than just saying things, because it actually creates a sense of embodying what we're intending to do. And it works with different, circuits in our brain. Writing down, what is your intention for the day? Even if it is to remain in my center today. And if there's something that worries you, as a stressful meeting or conversation or deadline, just imagine what is the quality that you need to embody for that situation to go as well as possible. And you might just take 3 breaths, imagining that you're filling yourself with that quality. So maybe it's, I need patience in that meeting. So just before I go to work, I'm going to take 3 breaths. I'm going to fill myself with that quality of patience. I'm going to get that sense. And then when I'm in that meeting, I'm going to practice that. So if we can start just with a connection morning and evening, they're very simple and yet very profound rituals that don't take a lot of time. Yep. You know, you could spend 5 minutes in the morning and the evening, or even 1 minute in the morning and the evening, 30 seconds in the morning and the evening to start. And yet that reflection will change your life, and it will change your life in many ways. But one of the ways is because you are developing that amazing faculty of self-observation, which is the key to everything. If someone asks me, and they often do, what is the one skill that leaders need most right now? It is the skill of observing themselves and observing the systems they're part of. Because only once we have observed things as they are, of intervening in them in a positive way. The second I would say is listening, but that listening is also listening to oneself, listening to others, listening, truly listening, deeply listening to the systems in the world around us. So I hope that's kind of bridged those questions, Pete.
Well, again, in some ways it has for me, so I'm grateful.
Good.
I'm conscious of time, Alison, but I have been making some notes. There's a couple of things I do want to ask you about, if you're okay with a little bit more time.
Of course, and I can flow this afternoon. I'm working in
cool.
Europe tonight, so I start later.
You mentioned way back earlier in our conversation that we've become disconnected from our wildness. Tell me more.
So even with the wild environment, so I spoke earlier about if we had a relationship with the planet, we wouldn't destroy it. If we really felt that deep sense of kinship with the trees, we would know that they are a part of us, and we would know that destroying a part of ourselves will not lead us into any kind of utopia. And if it leads us to a tech utopia, no thanks, but that's just a short passage of time.
Yeah.
So I think actually one of the things we can do to connect with our own inner sense of our true nature, our wildness, is to spend more time in the natural world and actually observing our natural world. We've lost touch with what's deeply natural for us as human beings, which is connection with ourselves, understanding of ourselves, as well as our natural environment. I don't see a separation between myself and the natural environment in the way many do. So I see completely connected. Sense of true connection with each other. We've lost sense of the wildness of being in community. So for so many of us who live in these very strange nuclear family constructs,
Yeah, highly unusual these days.
where we're, spend most of our time working to put a roof over our heads, for many of us, to put our kids through school, ferry kids to activities. There's so much distraction that feels meaningful, but actually it's just part of existing in this status quo systems that we've constructed. And we get so focused on the nuclearity of that system that we forget about our responsibilities to, yes, having a healthy family, but then connecting with the broader communities and the broader world and creating health there. So wonderful if we can start with the health of the family, but often we're not even starting there.
Yeah.
We're starting with the hamster wheel. So we're going through the motions of living, but without aliveness in it. Our life itself becomes a habit, not a ritual.
Ooh.
Right?
Yep.
And so start with your nuclear family by all means, but ritualize the bringing aliveness to that system. Healthy self, alive self, connected self, rewilded self, which doesn't look like running around naked in the forest all day, every day. Well, it might for some people, no judgment. Love a bit of nudity. Go for it. Yeah. But for me, and I operate in corporate settings, I operate in very material, I'm very highly pragmatic, I've got the ability to be highly commercial in my life. All of that comes with a sense of wildness. Why? Because I'm connected to a deeper sense of self. I've traveled a journey with that question, who am I? Never finding the end destination, because I'd never like to limit myself that way. And so I feel wild in everything I do, including talking to my accountant about my tax, every few months, like, because there's so that there's, for me, it's that sense of who am I and where are we? Two questions we need to ask as humanity. These questions can take us through at least to our deathbed this lifetime, and potentially beyond, if that's your belief system. They're so rich. Who am I and where am I? Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mean I'm sitting in my office. It's like I'm on this beautiful planet. I have this amazing ecosystem around me. Yep. I'm connected to these communities, this family. And then that's our field of service. A teacher once said to me years ago, wherever you are is your field of service.
Yeah, wherever you are, be there.
Yeah. And that's what we bring that aliveness to.
Alison, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to pause there. Just to practical things, where can people get in touch? I know you've got a book out.
Yes.
Leadership for the New Millennium. Indeed.
AlisonCameron.com, Alison with one L. And you can send me an email there, Alison@AlisonCameron.com. I am on LinkedIn. I'm continually toying with escaping social media entirely, but I haven't yet.
I reckon when I'm retired, at some point, I will just give it all up.
Yeah. So we'll wait and see. But would love to hear from anyone who.
Great.
I also understand. I'd like to let people know. I understand that some of the topics we've discussed today could feel out of reach or unrealistic. And start small if you're interested in exploring. And so that quote around discipline leads to freedom is very true.
Yep.
All of us have the opportunity to spend 2 minutes a day at least just being with that question, who am I?
Yep.
And if we can start there, the whole world can unfold in front of us that looks quite different. And by the way, I've been working with a small group of leaders for some time who have been applying the principles in the book, applying the principles that we've discussed today. And they are all living in the world, very pragmatic, mainly high-level corporate leaders. And their pragmatic impact, their wealth, their success their happiness, none of that has actually suffered. So I think so often we use the excuse that, oh, if I do that, it will compromise this. Yes, we need to take the step down the rabbit hole and risk all of that. However, it's not binary. And I haven't seen, in fact, that needs to translate.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources. We'll put them in the show notes when it gets published. If it's okay with you, Alison, I'd like to end on a relatively lighter note if possible.
Great.
And ask, a couple of quick fire questions and, first thought, best thought would be great. Are you more sunset or sunrise?
Sunrise at the beach, sunset in the mountains.
Okay, cool. Do you prefer a night out or a night in?
Night in.
Okay. Would you rather travel to the past or travel to the future?
Neither.
Okay.
I'm very happy living in the present moment.
Okay. What's been your guilty TV lockdown pleasure?
Oh, so many. So many. Oh, well, I rewatched Scandal.
Okay.
Yeah, and all the seasons.
Wow.
It's fantastic. Shonda Rhimes, Kerry Washington stars. Anyone who likes intelligent trash, go get it.
Two final questions. I'm a big book lover, as you can probably see behind me, as I know you are. What's a book that's changed your life?
Herman Hesse, The Glass Speed Game, and Creating Freedom by Raul Martinez. Have to have two.
I think I might have to get the Creating Freedom one for the obvious connection. And then final question from me, which I've just realized is probably not a quick fire question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I've got time today.
Apart from who am I and where am I, what's a question that's changed your life?
A question that's changed my life. Would you like to go out for dinner?
What a brilliant answer. That is a brilliant, that's world-class answer, Alison. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
really
having
appreciate
me. It was super fun.
Yep, super fun. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for your insight. And thank you so much for sharing yourself.
Oh, absolute pleasure. So much love, Pete.